Hey guys, this is Françoise. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I'm going to be using the entire collection of these Art Philosophy watercolor tubes, and I'm going to be swatching my paints to learn about their properties, like that. So this is going to help you in two different ways. The first one is that if you hesitate between two different brands, you can start studying the properties for each brand, and even though it varies from color to color, could give you a better idea of which brand you might want to go for. So that's the first thing. And it's also going to help you make the right decisions when you paint, because if you understand how your paints behave, it's going to be easier to use them on paper. So that's going to be very useful. I think you can enjoy this video. I hope so. And I can't wait to get started. There are 18 colors available with the Art Philosophy watercolor tubes, and I'm going to use them all for this color swatching lesson to show you how to make simple watercolor swatch cards and get to know the shades for the specific brand if you're interested in that. In the front of each tube, you can read what the shade of the specific color is. This one here, for instance, is ivory black. And elsewhere on the package or on the manufacturer's website, there should be a mention of what grade your paints are. There are two different grades for watercolor: student grade paint and artist grade, also called professional grade paint. In general, it varies from brand to brand. Student grade paints hold less pigment, the colors may not look as good and vibrant, and there is a higher chance the paints fade a bit over time. While the other type, artist grade paints, and that's what these are, is a general indicator that these would last better over time and be more vibrant on paper because they usually are more pigment rich. And of course, they also cost more than student grade paints. I'm going over this fairly quickly as I really want to show you how to swatch the paints for their properties in this video. So this is where it gets interesting. On the package or on the manufacturer's site, there should be also a clear mention of what the paint properties are, and that is going to be different for each color and even each brand, whether it's student or artist grade. That's why these swatches are really worth the time if you want to understand watercolor a bit more. For instance, two same shades of blues from different brands probably won't behave or even look exactly the same, and within one same brand, each color will differ from the next. Don't worry, you can learn to paint and improve your skills without knowing all the properties and doing all the research. It took me a few months until I even started to look into this, and it didn't hinder my progress before that. But at least understanding how the medium works will open up new doors for your painting learning process, and you can even become more intentional when you use your paints. And like I said in the beginning, you can also start to identify the colors that you think would work best for you among a variety of brands based on this research. I'm going to go over all the properties you can look for next. To get started swatching your paints, you'll need a set of small watercolor cards that equal the number of paints you have. So let's say you're swatching 24 colors. Make 24 of these cards. I cut mine out of the usual watercolor pad that I use, 100% cotton paper, because if you can, you want to test those properties on the paper you usually use, so you can really see how the paints would behave when you're actually painting. That's very important because watercolor papers can really affect how paints behave and move. I insist on this in almost all my videos because paper is such a game changer with how a watercolor looks. If you want to do it like me, you want to write the brand and the name of the shade on top, and make sure that when you swatch the paint, you leave an empty spot at the bottom. Of course, this is the way I chose to do the layout of my cards after looking it up online, but you can customize yours in the way you prefer. And by the way, the credit goes to Anthony from the blog A Watercolor Affair for this layout, even though I tweaked some things to fit my taste. So I'll make sure to link his article in my description, so you can check that out if you like. The next step is to grab a waterproof black marker and trace a line. Horizontal or vertical, it doesn't really matter. This is going to be useful because it's going to tell us how transparent this or that paint is. In my case with these paints, I noticed that they're pretty transparent in general, so you can clearly see the black line, but some colors were obviously on the more opaque side, most of the dark colors and also yellow ochre. Now I'm painting a gradient of each color on the swatch cards. I start with a highly concentrated mix and I keep adding water to my brush to end up with a much lighter one. It's really important to try and get the paint as concentrated as possible at first and end with the lightest, most watery if you prefer, version of this color, so you can clearly see how the paint looks from very dark to very light and how opaque or transparent it is against the black line. It's interesting to know how opaque or transparent your paints are, especially when you want to use the glazing technique, which is when you layer a color on top of another one. I find that for portraits and painting the skin, it helps even more because sometimes I just want to add a glow to the skin with a pinkish tone. So I wouldn't want, for instance, to use an opaque shade of pink. I would want a more transparent one to make it look more natural. And all I have to do is grab my swatch cards and I have a better idea of what shade is going to be better. I found all the information I need about the properties for each of these paints at the back of the tube, so I wrote it down at the back of each card, and if you don't find anything on the pan or tube, go to the brand's website and you should be able to find this information there. Let's go back to transparency and opacity. It actually does say on the tubes if the shades are transparent, semi-transparent, or opaque. Transparent is indicated by a capital T. Semi-transparent, a capital ST, semi-opaque, a capital SO, and opaque, a capital O. Something I love to learn about is pigment information. It will give you details on what pigments make this or that color. For instance, my indigo has 2 different pigments of blue and 1 pigment of black. You will see abbreviations like PY for pigment yellow, PO for pigment orange, PR for pigment red, and so on. Knowing how long-lasting your paints are going to be, especially if they were to be framed near a light source for months or years, is going to be a concern if you start working more professionally and selling your work. My tubes indicate the light fastness rating with Roman numerals 1, 2, and 3, but you may also come across a capital AA for extremely permanent, which is great, a capital A for permanent, a capital B for moderately durable, and a capital C for fugitive. Fugitive being the lowest rating. At the bottom of the card, I'm wetting the paper, and I drop each paint to see how well it spreads. It's very clear from looking at all the swatches that some move better than others. My ultramarine deep and yellow ochre paints barely moved, while others like my permanent yellow deep and Prussian blue spread out a lot. This information will be interesting if you're working wet and wet a lot and you want beautiful backgrounds where colors are able to intermix very well. Then you'd probably want to use the ones that can expand nicely. But I guess it depends on what effect you're trying to achieve too. This is also where granulation, if any, also becomes more obvious, and I can see that in my swatches. Granulation is when, as you mix paint with water, the color separates from the binder that holds the pigments together. It's going to give the paint a patchy look, almost like full-grain leather. I didn't find any written information about granulation for my paints, but after swatching them, I can very clearly see that some do granulate, more or less, ultramarine deep being the most obvious one. This is nice when you want to achieve specific effects with your paints or just add interest to a painting through texture. Another piece of information you will find and you can write down is how staining each color is. Most times you'll find a capital 1, it's non-staining, then capital 2, medium staining, capital 3, high staining. Basically, the more staining a color is, the harder it is to lift with a clean and damp brush once you've put it on paper. The small square I painted in the lower left corner of each card was intended for that, to test for the staining properties. I found that best practice for accurate results is to come back later, when the paint really is dry, and try lifting the paint with a Q-tip, for instance. So that's what I did the next day, and again there, I clearly saw which paints were easier to lift than others. I went through all the properties there are for watercolors. If you want to bind your swatch cards like mine, you'll just need to make a hole in the upper left corner and use some kind of cord to tie it all up. I hope you enjoyed this demonstration. If it's the case, please help my channel out with a like, a comment, or just by sharing this video. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more art and watercolor video. See you next time!